In this video, we are going to be generating a front-end, and then we're going to be downloading that front-end locally and look at the generated code using Visual Studio Code. Now, if you remember from one of our previous videos, if you expand Tools and you click Hyper ID here, remember that we downloaded the Northwind plugin database, this guy, and then we generated an API wrapping our Northwind database. Now, this provides us with all HTTP endpoints required to do CRUD operations upon every single table in our Northwind database. Now, what we are going to be doing now is that we're going to go to the Crud Generator, and then we're going to choose the front-end tab here instead. Now, realize this might change in the future version of Magic because we are actually refactoring these parts of the front end. However, the general concept will anyways be the same. You will have the ability to generate a front end. Now, if you go to front end here and you give your front end a name, I'm going to call mine Northwind, and you can choose a template. Now, the Angular service type of template only generates the TypeScript service layer for you using HTTP service from Angular. It's kind of like creating, you might argue, an Angular ORM type of thing, allowing you to use the HTTP Web API to perform CRUD towards your database tables. However, the Angular one, that's only called Angular, actually generates a complete front end with a GUI for you and everything. Now, to show an example of such a GUI, you can go to sakila.aista.com and you can log in with admin, and here you see an example front end that was generated using the front end generator. And as you can see, it provides you with all 4 CRUD operations on every single record in every single table you have. It allows you to create records, etc., delete record, filter on records, paging, and all that beautiful stuff. So now we are going to create our own front end. And when you have chosen an app name, you have chosen the Angular template, important, and you can optionally apply a file command, copy, write, Acma Inc, for instance. Then you can choose your palette. Let's choose brown just for the kicks of it, and you can choose light or dark theme, and you can go and provide HTML code for your landing page. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make sure that the only module that is selected is the Northwind module, and then I'm going to click generate. Now we're being asked if we want to deploy our front end into Hub. We're not going to do that at the moment because we're going to download the front end and edit it locally and have a look at it and analyze it. So just click no here, then open up Hyper ID, and your Angular front end code now exists within etc., front end, and source. If you make sure that you select the first source folder here now, you click these 3 action things, these dots, then you choose active folder, and then you choose download folder, then you will actually download the entire source code for this particular Angular project. At this point, we can just unzip it. I've already actually, let me rename it such that it becomes correct because I've done it before. I now have my entire Angular project here. And now what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to open this in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open the folder in Visual Studio Code. The easiest way for me to do that on a Mac is actually to use a terminal window. However, this might be different if you are on a Windows machine. I'm going to make sure I go to the source folder, at which point I can see ls and I can see the Angular files here, and then I'm going to write code /. You might want to open Visual Studio Code manually by simply just opening it more traditional way, and then choose File, Open Folder here in the top left corner somehow. However, I now have my Angular project. Now I can open a new terminal window. And of course, for the record, you're going to have to install Node.js locally on your development machine if you haven't already done so, because an Angular project depends upon Node to compile it and actually serve it. So now I can write npm -i, which basically installs and links in the nodes and node_modules folder for me by downloading it from the npm package repository. And this is going to take some time. However, when it's done, I've basically linked in my project. In the meantime, you can have a look at the source code here by expanding source, app, components. These are our database tables. So you see we have one folder for every single database table that we chose to generate the front end for. If you expand the categories now, for instance, you can see we have an HTML file. For the Northwind categories table, we have a SCSS file, and we have a TypeScript file here. Now, the TypeScript file currently shows a bunch of bugs because it still haven't linked in the node_modules folder. However, once the npm I thing is done, all bugs are going to be disappearing. Now, first of all, the Angular result is using a material table. Now, if you don't know what an Angular material table is, you can literally open up Google Chrome. You can search for Angular material, and it's probably going to be the first hit here on either Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever, at which point you can click that link and you can have a look at the components that Google have created in Angular material for you. It's a little bit slow now because I'm doing npm I, downloading a ton of components. So these are the components that is basically creating the Angular frontend. If you click components here, and then you find a table down here somewhere, you can actually see the API for a material table, and you can even see some example code here of how to use the Angular material table. We're not going to do that. We are going to serve our frontend now, ng space serve, and unless my port is already taken by some other Angular project, port 4200, then this is going to work. You might have to apply a -- port argument to use a different port if you're already serving another Angular project. This is going to start serving our Angular project over localhost on our local development machine. Now, as you can see here, we have material tables, we have ng containers, then we have a th table header element, we have mat form fields, mat labels, all of that beautiful stuff, input element from basic HTML, etc., etc. And the result of this becomes the following. Now I'm going to have to log in with Guy and my password on my cloudlet at hub, right? So that's the username and password. And let me illustrate this by clicking F12 and just clicking anything here. So you can see it's actually going towards my cloudlet at hub at aista.com. So that is the backend for this particular frontend. Now, if I go to categories, you will see that, okay, I have the ability to filter, I have the ability to page. This one only has 8 items, so let me find something else that has more items. I have the ability to page, it's blistering fast, I can sort increasingly or descendingly, I can create new items, and I can delete items, and I can edit items. I basically have every single CRUD operation towards my backend in this frontend. And it takes care of referential integrity, such that if there is a foreign key pointing from the orders table to the customer table on the customer ID, such as here, I can actually filter and select the customer according to his name. All of this was automatically generated for me. Hopefully it's going to work when I save it now. And I didn't write a single line of code for it. However, you still probably need to modify the code. So let's look at that modification process by analyzing the output of the Angular generator. As you can see here, it creates one folder for every single database table I have. And inside of this folder is the main component HTML file. What you're looking at here is this thing here, everything here. Then there is a modal form, a modals folder here that actually has a material modal dialog. This is the stuff that shows when I click either plus here or I click edit here. So this dialog, if I now go to categories and I click plus here now, you will see I have a category name and I have a description and I have a picture upload thing here. This is what's happening here inside of categories / modals. Here's the HTML file and here's the TypeScript file. Now, so this basically implies that there are two primary components for every single database table. There's a modal form, and then there's a grid, a material table type of component here. The material table type of component is the thing directly under the categories here. Here's the HTML file, here's the CSS file, and here's the TypeScript file. The TypeScript file for the main primary grid component again inherits. Because if you look at this file, it's not really that big, 187 lines of TypeScript code. That's like way too little to provide all of this functionality. That is because most of the functionality is actually extended from a TypeScript class called grid component. And this is where most of your Angular code for the data grid is, 469 lines of code. And as you can see here, this class has a couple of abstract methods that are not implemented, which the inherited component is expected to override. You can see here, for instance, entity base URL. That is a method you will find probably here too. As you can see here, protected abstract entity base URL. This is basically the base URL for the HTTP web API where categories, entities exists, where it expects to find post, gets, puts, and deletes, in addition to count. Then you see it has a reads, yet again, an abstract method. It has a count, yet again, an abstract method. Then it has a delete, yet again, an abstract method, and reset paginator, yet again, an abstract method, which is overridden in the specialized component implementation TypeScript file. And then, of course, it implements ng init, which is on init from Angular core, where it retrieves the data, and then it creates form controls. These form controls, if you look at it from the base class, are basically form control types from Angular, which does debounce. Debounce means basically if I am inside of orders here, for instance, and I type V, then it takes 400 milliseconds before it actually invokes the HTTP web API and actually applies my filtering. The reasons for that is because I might want to write several characters. And I don't want to have 4 HTTP invocations now, as I'm writing 4 characters, right? I only want to have 1. So only when the user stops typing, it actually invokes the HTTP web API. That's basically what this debounce thing does. Then it subscribes and retrieves the query. And as you can see, it does a this.process filter, which again resets the paginator, which you remember is an abstract method on our base grid.component.ts file. And then it invokes getData, which again invokes the necessary implementations of both read and count on our specialized implementation here. You can see read and count. So this allows us to get away with a small amount of code doing a lot of things by having these two abstract base classes. And the dialog too, the modal dialog too, functions similarly, except it doesn't extend a grid component, it extends dialog component, which also provides similar type of base class, except this time for the modal dialog. And as you can see here, it has a bunch of create columns, it has a constructor, it has a getData thing, which is an abstract method, which is overridden in, if we search for getData here now, in this part, then it has a getUpdate method, which is protected, which is overridden here, because this one happens to actually have an update method. If the CRUD table doesn't have an update method, then this will just simply throw an exception and return an error to the caller. That might be because some entities might not, for instance, have the update HTTP API, but we still need to reuse the same code in the front end. As you can see here, get create method, abstract, close, abstract, can edit column. This one is invoked from can edit column. If I have if I cannot edit this column for some reasons, because for instance my put endpoint doesn't allow me to pass in the category name, and this will return false. As you can see here, the code is basically to verify that I have this column in my create columns list further up here, which I can find here in create columns list. If I remove category name now, see now I have, if I edit this guy, let me find the categories. You see now I can edit category name. I have a category name here. If I remove this guy, I save my file, the Angular compiler is going to kick in again and recompile my page. And after some few seconds, I'm going to have my new code running. As you can see, it's refreshed here now, and I cannot apply category name here anymore. Why? Because I removed it from my create columns list here. Then you have a similar logic for update columns, which of course is if I'm updating a field. It's the exact same thing, except this time it's not while creating columns, but while updating. So if I want to prohibit my users from actually updating the category name, I can just remove it like this, and boom, I can add category names when I'm creating new entities, right? Let's wait until the TypeScript compiler is done and illustrate it. Now I can create category names, but if I edit an existing column, I cannot update category name because it no longer exists in my update columns list here. And then it just normalizes dates, if there are dates in the entity returned from the server, and overrides the other base class methods from our dialog.component.ts file here. Then let's have a look at the service layer, because if we collapse base, we collapse components, we look at services, then you will see that the HTTP service here was actually dynamically created. Now, if you ignore the log parts on the top and you scroll down to roughly line 100 or something, then you will see a big comment here saying HTTP REST method, your backend exposes. Here you can see the gets, the iCrud entity. It's a property allowing me to do stuff such as this. If I now do this.htp, actually, let me do it from this guy. If I just find any method, this.htp, and it doesn't have the HTTP service. So let me see what the name of the service is. Yeah, service is its name. This.service. You see now I have Northwind categories. This returns this thing, which happens to be an implementation of an interface called iCrud entity, which happens to implement all CRUD verbs. So I can now do .count, create, delete, read, and update. If I want to read now, I can do like this, .subscribe. This is a normal observable from Angular, .log, result. Let's try to see if we can get this to actually run. And it's running upon close, and it didn't work because we need to apply a filter. We're just going to apply an empty filter. So now when we are closing the edit modal dialog for categories, it's actually going to invoke our HTTP Web API. Of course, that's a really ridiculous use case. But anyways, it illustrates the example. And as you can see here, it invoked the HTTP Web API and returned all beverages to us. Right. Now, this thing allows you to filter. Right. Now, the filtering process here is basically what we are looking at when we are looking at our endpoints here. And we are finding categories, get. You see here, every single query parameter here can also be applied to our Angular code. Now, if we find some query parameter that kind of makes sense, for instance, %, or let's do %, and if this is working and actually returning items, yeah, and it's counting 5 items, but let's not use the count endpoint. Let's use the get endpoint here. And let's filter on category name like, %, character return, invoke. Now you can see we're getting some 5 items here. Previously we were getting 4 items. What we can do now, we can actually do categories.category name.like. categories dot category name dot like colon %a%, save our file. Hopefully this is going to work now when it's being recompiled, at which point when we're closing the dialog, it's only going to retrieve categories whose names contains the character of A. Let's try, clear our console here, close the dialog, and it didn't work. And why didn't it work? Category name like Northmail categories GB, let's see, network. Okay, so let's look at the log now. This is where the log becomes immensely valuable because we can actually see, okay, so categories dot category name dot like. Yeah, we had a capital L, small l. Caps lock was unfortunately locked. So let's wait for the compiler to recompile our Angular code. And then let's open the dialog and just simply close it immediately just to have our HTTP invocation kick in, at which point you can see it's returning 5 items. If we do the same with a character C, or let's try B, then now when we are opening and closing the model dialog, it's retrieving only one item, because only one item contained the character B, beverages. You can see beverages, condiments doesn't contain B, confections doesn't contain B, etc., etc. The point being that every single argument here, right, you can actually apply in your code. If you want to do paging, for instance, remember 5 was returning category name like character A, % on both sides of the A character, was returning 5 items. If we now do limit colon 3, it's only going to return 3 items, even though we have 5 items. Why? Because it's only going to return the 3 first items and not the rest of our items. Let's try it out, make sure it's working, open the dialog, close it, 3 items. And then you can apply offset. Offset is a number of items to offset before it starts returning items. Order allows us to order by any one of our columns. Direction means ordering ascendingly or descendingly. Operator means if you want to or and these query parameters together. If you're ANDing them together, all must match. If you're ORing them together, one must match in order for the backend to actually return it. The point being that all of these query parameters you can actually apply in your own front end using an ORM type of syntax, allowing you to use your Crud API almost as an ORM. And that was it for, I mean, there are obviously a bajillion additional things related to the Angular front end. However, this was the primary features of it. Obviously, you need to learn Angular and you need to learn TypeScript in order to actually effectively edit this code and modify it according to your needs. However, everything that's produced by Magic as you're generating your front end is 100% standardized Angular and TypeScript code following every single Lint standard that exists in the book. And that was it for this video. Remember to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell, and share the video with your friends. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.